Mark Hewlett, great to have you on the Joy of Paddle. We've met several times. I've been finding out more and more about what Soul Paddle is all about. But in your own words, who is Mark?
Minter, thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here. Who is Mark? Mark is the founder and chief executive of Soul Padel. Mark is married with three daughters and fell in love with paddle 3 years ago. And what a journey it's been in those last 3 years.
All right. Well, how on earth did you discover you're based up north and paddle is obviously now growing in the UK. But what was the discovery? Who brought you by hand to the court?
I have absolutely no right to be in paddle. Coming from Wigan, I should be involved with rugby league, and was a rugby player for well over 20 years.
Right.
I wasn't.
Something else we share.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. You have to in this part of the world. It's a birthright. I was not handheld or shown paddle. I stumbled upon paddle on my travels. I am very lucky to have parents who have a place in Portugal, and that's where I found it, fell in love, and got involved. And it was a sabbatical period for me. It was a period of reflection on what had been a traumatic couple of years. And I guess the timing was just right. I'd never played before, but I do and have played a lot of racket sports. And it was just one of those experiences that you don't forget. It was a community club. It was kind of rural Algarve, middle of nowhere, kids, grannies, everybody enjoying not just the paddle, but the social side of paddle. So that experience, it had quite a profound effect on me. And I guess, as I say, timing was right. Circumstances were good for me. I needed a pivot and a change of direction. And so, yeah, paddle found me really. I think it was in a divine way.
I love that. Without wanting you to divulge the trauma you talked about, but the what is it that you think makes paddle such a therapeutic, if I can put those terms? I don't know if I want to put those into your mouth, but such a sport.
Yeah, look, the trauma side of things was pandemic related, COVID related. I'd worked for the government for 2 years. I led the COVID testing program, so that was a tough job. It was, intensely stressful, but very much a rewarding and just a deep and meaningful, purpose-driven job. I was there to help save people's lives, quite frankly. So the pressures of that were obvious, but the rewards clearly were far outweighing any pressure or stress. However, that period of time for me was difficult, and I felt that I needed to change direction. I'd been in retail for well over 20 years. Been all around the world, very luckily to have worked in some wonderful places. The therapeutic side of paddle was for me at first just completely a distraction from everything else that was going on. It was a new thing that I'd never played before, so I enjoy new challenges. Technically, socially, everything was new. So that was the first impression for me. When I then got to know the sport a little bit better, this profound connectivity and community was where I got really sticky with this sport. It was just hard to put it into words, and the context really I've never found before in other sports. And I've played a lot of, very averagely, a lot of sports. With the exception of rugby union, this binding community of people who love the sport and will talk about it before they talk about anything else, I'd not seen before. And not just this generational kind of span, it was just this totally binding community that were centered around this club in the Algarve that I just thought, wow, this is different. I'd never experienced that before. Certainly not in a racket sport.
Well, that's the funny thing. I tend to also equate it to rugby union. I played for 18 years, and I would add a little bit of ice hockey because I feel like there's a camaraderie that's special when you go to bat for one another in a hardcore manner like you do in rugby, which we don't need to do in paddle. And yet with the combination or the similarity for me in rugby and
Mhm.
paddle is the third half, the
Yeah,
the the
yeah,
the Kenya, the beer afterwards,
exactly.
which you talk about everybody's game. You don't
Yeah,
just say, well, me and my we get the opposition together and we shoot the shit. We maybe shoot the boot or whatever.
yeah.
But
It's very similar in that regard. And I think that post-game chat where what happened on court happened, win, lose, draw, it doesn't really matter. I think the way that people, and again, this kind of social divide that is bridged, it's exactly the same with rugby. You could have bricklayers playing with barristers, and it's the same with paddle. It doesn't matter where you're from, who you are, what your economic status is. That's for me what paddle should be all about. It's wonderful in that regard.
totally agree, Mark. All right, so you discover the society or the community of paddle in the Algarve. You come back to the UK, and then this idea of soul paddle. So talk to us about the creation of soul paddle. What is soul paddle?
Yeah, look, I had this naive view that I was the first Englishman to discover paddle and would be one of the first to import it back into the UK. Clearly, I was out of my mind, and others had been pioneering this well before I had. There were two or three clubs that I went to see before I made the decision to get into this. Rocks Lane with Chris Warren, Middlesbrough with Nigel Garton, and then I'd seen others that were doing things differently to how I thought paddle should be done. It was premium, it was affluent, it was exclusive. So I, as you do with new ideas, you go to the pub, you have a few beers, and you have a chat with the people who are closest to you, and you start to brainstorm. And we brainstormed this really kind of accessible and affordable community concept. The bit we struggled on was what shall we call it? And as blokes do after a few beers, you get very, very creative. And we came up with some weird and wonderful names. We were put right when we came back from the pub, and my wife Tammy said, "There's only really one name you can call this, and it's Soul Paddle. It's everything that you experienced. It's everything that we saw. The soul of this sport is exactly what you're talking about, but you've had too many beers, and the names you've come up with are shit. So here's the name." And the name stuck.
She sounds like a woman who talks straight.
She talks straight and she talks sense, and she's very much at the center of everything that we're doing at the moment, and will be for the foreseeable future. So yeah, Soul Paddle. We talked about it, we just couldn't name it. So, and this was back in kind of September of 23. Once we'd named it, it became very, very obvious that we'd got a great name and a great brand, because the extensions to Soul Paddle into the concepts that we now run were very easy in the naming rights, but in the operational deployment, not so easy. So what we wanted to have was this club where everybody was welcome, everybody could meet, play, and connect. And there are three values that run through as like, Blackpool stick of rock. And how do we make sure that those values are brought to life in how we design our clubs, how we employ our people, how we run the programs that give back to our communities or engage parts of the communities that were disengaged from other sports or, unfortunately, other paddle clubs. And all of that pre-work before we'd even gone to, a design and creative agency, before we'd gone to landlords to talk about deals, that was all there in this kind of foundational, conversational early work. And so the genesis of Soul Paddle was probably always right. The test and the proof was going to be, how does it go to market? And that
Mm.
next stage that we've gone through in the last, let's call it 18 months, has proven lots of things. But as you do in a startup organization, you pivot, you change, and you adapt. But we've stayed true with, we welcome everyone, and our values will always be meet, play, and connect.
Brilliant. So, what clubs do you have, Mark? Where are they, and how are they going?
They're going really well. Our first club was Stockport, and we started with
Which
Decathlon.
is outside of Manchester, correct?
Yeah, so it's kind of South Manchester. Manchester's an absolute hotbed now of paddle. There are now 31 places to play in and around Greater Manchester. But when we first started, there were only 4. We had 2 courts on a very temporary basis next to Decathlon. And Decathlon's attitude was, you put the money in, let's see how it goes, and we'll work it out. So they offered us a 3-month license to operate, very high risk for a startup. We raised some early seed funding and we got on with it. That was June last year. The 2 courts went so well, we were asked to stay, we were extended, and then we broadened our relationship with Decathlon, and we're now a 6-court club with 4 undercover, and the 2 OGs are still there.
Nice.
The club's going really well. Look, it's 95% occupied throughout the whole time we've been open. We have 18 different programs that run at the club. They're all full and the community's really engaged. We then went to, how do we do this everywhere? And how do we extend this, the genesis and this kind of bottle the DNA and take it to other parts of the UK? So we wanted to get into the education sector because we primarily believe there is a generational moment, I think, in the UK where if you're aged between 16 and 24, for the first time, you get to own a sport. It can be yours to shape for the next 4 or 5 decades. That opportunity doesn't come along very often. So how do we put this sport in front of this generation? So the first thing we did was pick up the phone to Loughborough University. It is the epicenter of sport in the UK.
It certainly is, yeah.
And so we were very fortunate to be offered an opportunity to put 2 courts down in a location right in the heart of campus. And again, like we did with Decathlon, we risk the capital, we put in the operational costs and off it goes. It's been 100% full from the day we arrived, which was the 1st of March this year. Students love it. The community are engaged with the university and the campus life anyway. So the other aspect we hadn't really considered was the amount of elite athletes that use our courts in their downtime. Lots and lots of them train and are based there for all the obvious reasons. So they're the first 2 clubs that we've opened. We're now in planning on 8 different locations. We're in build on 2 new locations, Merseyside and also in Glasgow. And we have a pipeline that could extend into 40 to 50 locations around the UK. And that pipeline we've been working on relentlessly really for the last 18 months. So we feel as if we've got a lot of things right, but we've now got to test ourselves beyond the 2 locations where we've proven we can fill courts and we can run programs and we can build communities, but we now need to prove that we can do that in multiple locations.
Surely in your model, you're not looking at high pricing to be community oriented in the decathlon space, for example, or in a university space. And so getting the right business economics down pat is obviously going to be critical. Yes. I'm probably more interested to hear how you put soul into it. And, having been the CEO myself of a company, the idea of having a brand that has some harmony across 40 countries, as it was for me, with so many different outlets. How do you keep the brand consistent with this notion of meet, play, and connect? Mm-hmm. What do you think are they're going to be the critical factors in order to keep the soul alive everywhere?
It's a very good question, and it's one I've also been challenged with in the past, as you have in multiple countries, and getting consistency. My learnings really come from my time with both Lidl and Aldi. How do you scale this model, and how do you stay true to the essence of what it is that makes this special? People are the primary driver of culture and are the manifestation of everything that your brand should represent. So we recruit and we train and we stay very close to the people that we bring within the Soul Padel family. If that bit isn't right, everything else fails. But everything else involves the application of the brand across the buildings, across the physical and digital spaces. The digital space in particular is really interesting, and we've recently launched our loyalty app Soulmates. We're now nearly at 2,000 people downloaded in 4 weeks. That that again is a channel through which we can preach our brand and broadcast what our brand stands for, because everything about Soulmates is giving back to the community. So our points are not called points, they're called almas. Alma, as you know, is soul in Spanish. If you earn almas, you can burn them on free courts, or you can gift them to our programs, such as What's That Racket and free courts for schools. And so the people always will be the most important part of our brand, but everything cascades from that. And even our, lots of clubs have WhatsApp groups. It's an unbelievably powerful marketing tool, but it's how you use these digital tools to speak about what your brand stands for. And so, yeah, look and feel is great. Marketing is great. Websites are great. A lot of people tell us that there's a different feeling around what we do, and that again resonates with me and tells me that the soul is there.
Nice. Well, of course, that for me, this is 100% making sense. Cultures in the people. One of the challenges that I would therefore see is in the coaching, because at the end of the day, they're the most sort of close to the individuals. You got the reception, the bar area, presumably, and that kind of a thing, depending on the age groups. But the coach has to also be the coach of paddle and bring the paddle concepts and culture that you were talking about, God, and then also the soul thing and bringing that energy in so that it feels right. And I suspect it's one of the big challenges that you guys will be facing in the UK anyway.
Yeah, it's a huge challenge, and this is one of the things that we've really scratched our heads on for the last year at least. There's two things that we've done relatively recently. One probably in the more recent past. We've partnered with an organization called Lusu Sports that is run by a lady called Sue Morrison. So Sue Morrison and her business partner have been in coaching and development for children probably for 40 years, collectively probably 80 years between the two of them. So Lou and Sue, Lou works with the LTA. She is the head coach for the visually impaired Great British tennis team. And Sue works primarily with children, but also with people with learning disabilities. I don't think there's a better kids coach in this country than Sue Morrison. And having just watched 2 summer camps over the last week, how she engages with young children and early teens is wonderful. And particularly for those who've never picked up a racket of any type. So we've basically partnered with that organization for the next 3 years to develop not just introductory paddle, but junior academies. How do we get kids from that first taster into, I want to play this sport and I want to play this as my primary sport? So that's one of the things we had to get right if we were to stand behind this community concept. And with kids comes everything else. Most recently, recognizing a talent deficiency really amongst our own team, we wanted a technical director. We wanted someone who has played paddle from being a kid, lives and breathes the sport, coaches at a very high level. So we recruited David Garrido Garcia, who most recently has been the head coach of the Abu Dhabi national team. He's coached very high level players, primarily in the Middle East, but also in Europe. And most recently was the technical director for WPA in Dubai. So someone like him is not easy to find. So
that's right.
We went on a large international headhunter style exercise supported by the wonderful David Peacock, who is one of the best headhunters I've ever worked with in sport and leisure. However, for David, this was a challenge because paddle was new to him. But he's deeply networked. And so we shortlisted 3 people. We flew them to the UK. They spent 3 days with us each. And David was by far the standout candidate. Not only is he uber talented as a coach and a coach of coaches, he gets the community. And that's what we wanted to see. What we didn't want was a journeyman pro,
right.
promiscuous, as you know, they are the most promiscuous professionals I've ever worked with. We wanted someone who really got what we were trying to deliver. So David's role will be broad. from everything, even the design of our clubs he will be involved with, but the technical proficiency of who we employ to coach our players will be directly under his remit. And with the exception of 2 or 3 other clubs in the UK, I don't think there's many taking it as seriously as we will under his leadership. And I really, he's only been with us for the last 3 weeks, but I'm already seeing the impact. He's with us for the majority of September. He has 2 jobs, by the way. He's also the head coach of the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, which is more high pressure and stressful than it is working for Soul Padel. But
Well, the good news is that David speaks English.
Perfect English. Yeah.
And that is such an essential component. All right, let's last few minutes with you, Mark. Let's just talk about your paddle. I always like to talk about paddle.
Please
You
don't.
got yeah, no, but you got into paddle down in the Algarve. You play relatively frequently, I'm guessing, these days if you're not traveling. But what's your favorite shot in paddle?
Am I allowed to say the serve? I mean, is that just like
Ha! Sure.
am
Well,
I?
you're allowed to say what you want, man.
Look, the reason I say that is that because most of the people who come and play with us are brand new to the sport, and
Mhm.
most of them have played a little bit of tennis. But of the overwhelming feedback is at least I can get this game going very easily.
Right.
That for me is one of the biggest hurdles for any sport is this: how technically proficient do I need to be to get going? So the fact that the serve is very easy for a beginner, for me, makes it the best shot in the sport.
Oh, I love that answer. That is a supremely counterintuitive answer, Mark, and it is delightful. It really does show the nature of the culture of paddle in your answer. Because the others who want to talk about the serve to win the
Just
ball.
get the game going. Get the
Absolutely. Try not to double fault, however.
Yeah, yeah. Tell me about it.
I double faulted yesterday. Yeah, what was I doing? But all right, so I love that. What about do you watch any of the pro paddle?
Not a huge amount, to be honest. If I catch glimpses of it, it's highlights. I was very lucky to go to the M3 Academy in Madrid, and I watched Galan and Chingotto play. In practice, it was amazing. Up front, by the side of the court, with my face to the glass. I've never watched a professional game. I've never been to a tournament like that. My interest is primarily in the grassroots side of the sport, but to
Sure.
watch it just in practice was outstanding.
It's another level. I'm going to Paris for the major to cover it for the Baneja. And so I think that one of the big lessons I've had many pros, of course, on this podcast,
Yeah.
is for the regular punters who are trying to learn paddle, watch the women play, because
Mm.
that is a far more accessible, proper learning. Don't, you can watch for fun if you want to watch, Paquito or Tapia do their magic shots. But for us, if you want to learn actually how to play, go check out the women.
I agree.
But you also, before the recording, told me that you have a favorite partner. So Theo Garton, who I'm guessing is part of the Middlesbrough gang, and
Yeah.
then a lady called Abby Ombrachuran. You mentioned them as your favorite pro players.
Yeah,
I know the name of Theo Garton, but
you do.
Abby. So who?
Yeah, this is a great story. So we hosted the inaugural Stockport Open in when did we do that? In July. And we invited 40 men and 40 women to take part. And the people who invest in our organization were very kind to put £10,000 prize pool into the weekend.
Wow.
However, we stipulated that no one could be a full-time professional or a member of a national squad. So we didn't want this to be dominated by the usual crowd. We wanted this to be available to very good amateurs, with some exceptions. So the men's tournament went as predicted. It was a great tournament, very enjoyable, but the women's was outstanding. And there was a pair of players that had travelled over from Hull, and Abby was one of them. And when you see Abby play, you just know someone's got the gift. They're still learning the game to an extent, but she's already breaking into junior squads for England and Great Britain. Her hands, her placement, her communication, she looks quirky, she acts quirky. She's got a real court presence and persona. And she won our women's tournament, and she was absolutely delighted to win because each of the players who won got 1,500 quid each, which is a lot of money. A
Good
lot
money.
of money for a pro in the UK, never mind someone who isn't. But I firmly believe on the right track, Abby will be one of the best players in the UK, barring
Fabulous. Well,
injury.
I'll be looking out for her. And I understand from her last name that she has some French roots as well, which is brilliant as well. That's lovely. Well, listen, Mark, what would you say is the future of paddle in the UK and in the world? How do you evaluate that from your business-minded self?
I think paddle's got a wonderful future in the UK. You know, 2 years ago when I started to talk to prospective landlords, I was given blank stares and the kind of go away treatment. Now it's the other way around. They want to talk to me. We've got to be careful, obviously. I think there's a natural handbrake on everything, which is the government and the planning system. But I do think there'll be sustained growth. There'll be market segmentation. There will be some failures. There'll be some casualties. But all the indicators that I see suggest paddle's got a very prosperous and successful future if we get engagement right, if we get junior paddle right, and if we get coaching right. I think the rest will come. There's enough money available to invest in this sport now. And I think growth will be sustainable. And we sincerely hope we're a big part of that. Globally, we've registered our brand in 30 different countries. And we are on the ground looking for sites in Australia because I'm an Australian citizen as well as a UK citizen, and it's 2 years behind where we are in the UK. It's emerging. There are very few places to play, and I do think the Aussies will love this game. So I think the future is very bright. I sincerely hope that Brisbane is the first Olympics that we see paddle competitively played as a recognised sport, and I'll be there if it is. Yeah, I think you look at the US and markets where there is liquidity and there is opportunism and there is optimism. Paddle should be there right in the middle of all of that.
Well, it makes me think, Mark, it's not exactly a fully congealed thought, but if we think about Argentina, we think about the growth in South Africa, we think about
Yeah,
Australia and the UK, I'm even going to say the French. There's a whole lot of another sport that also is a burgeoning sport in each of these countries.
yeah, yeah.
So let's have, the Six Nations and some down under
That,
competitions in the future.
that would be awesome.
All right. Well, Mark, how can somebody, what sort of socials or calls to action would you like to be able to shout out for?
Very active on LinkedIn. You can follow my journey and the journey of Soul Padel both via our corporate LinkedIn account or my own personal account. And please do have a look at what we're doing online with soulmates and join the journey. Be part of something special.
Spectacular. Vamos, Mark. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me.